Hey, how's it going, X-Fans? It's Riley, and I'm back with another episode of the X-Men Readathon. So this time, I'm going to be making a video that's kind of focused on the first uh, 18, I think, issues of X-Factor. Um, so this is everything from X-Factor that's leading from the first issue and going forward up to the cusp of the Fall of the Mutants story arc. Since Fall of the Mutants is collected in its own oversized hardcover with a bunch of issues of Uncanny X-Men, New Mutants, and X-Factor, I'm going to be making a video for that book itself. But separately, I'm going to be talking about X-Factor and the issues that led up to that point because they're really important issues and there's a lot of stuff that I'd really like to talk about there. So before X-Factor started to be published, the X-Men franchise as a whole was really Chris Claremont's game. It was Claremont who was writing both of the ongoing series that were relating to the X-Men at the time. He was doing both Uncanny X-Men and the New Mutants, both of which were just extremely successful books, and the X-Men franchise wound up becoming the top franchise at Marvel Comics. For quite a while, actually. And Claremont's run, this is nowhere near like the end of his run either. He keeps going for quite a while. But at this point, there's kind of this editorial mandate. They want another X-Men team, and they want it to have the original 5 X-Men characters. They want it to have Cyclops, Beast, Iceman, Angel, and, of course, Jean Grey. Now, this was a little bit of an issue because at the time, the only ones that were active members of X-Men teams, actually the only one was Cyclops, and even then he had kind of retired at this point. And this editorial idea of bringing the original 5 back together was kind of working entirely against what Claremont was wanting to do with these characters. At the time, Cyclops had recently gotten married, maybe a few years prior to a character known as, or that was named Madeline Pryor. Now, Madeline Pryor, Cyclops meets her during the Paul Smith run on Claremont's X-Men, which is collected almost in its entirety in the From the Ashes paperback. And during the From the Ashes storyline, Cyclops meets Madeline, and she looks exactly like Jean Grey. This beautiful woman with red hair she appears exactly like Jean Grey, and Scott Summers is convinced that she is somehow Jean resurrected because she is the Phoenix, and Phoenixes can resurrect themselves. So he's kind of, believing that he needs to go research who she is and learn about who she is. And he actually meets her at a Summers family reunion because she works in Alaska for Scott's grandparents. So he meets her and he talks to her and he finds out that she actually survived this plane crash, and she was the sole survivor of this crash, and that crash just so happened to be on the same day that Jean Grey died. So he's like, this cannot be a coincidence. She has to be related to Jean. She has to be like the resurrected version of Jean Grey herself. So he starts pursuing her and learning about her and stuff, and he discovers that he's completely wrong and that she's not actually Jean Grey. She's her own person, and this is a whole storyline in itself that I'm not going to go into detail about because I already kind of talked about it in another video, so you can go back and watch that one whenever you want to. But he forms a relationship with her, and after a little, fight that the X-Men have with Mastermind, who has been disguising himself as Jason Wingard of the Hellfire Club, he winds up asking Madeline to marry him. They wind up being married, and a while later, they actually have a child together. So you have Scott and Madeline have moved out on their own. They've been doing their own thing for a while, apart from all the X-Men, apart from all the action. And he comes in every once in a while. He had, a fight with Storm to decide who was going to be the leader of the X-Men. And after losing that fight to her, he went off and did his own thing with Madeline. They had a child named Nathan. And, they had a little happy life going on there. But then all of a sudden, editorial decided that they wanted to bring back Jean Grey. Now, this really conflicted with what Claremont was wanting to do with the character because Claremont never planned on having Jean come back, at least not at this point. He planned on having Scott literally just retire from his role as an X-Man, and he might come up every once in a while for a big fight. They're fighting a really big villain and they need the help, and he would be around, as a secondary character in the book, as, Claremont does a lot with his with the X-Men. He'll bring them back from time to time. to visit for an issue or two. But he wasn't going to be an actual member of the book for as long as Claremont was planning. He wanted him to go off, retire, be in Alaska working with his grandparents and his family, and have his wife Madeline and his child Nathan, and maybe have another child or something. And that was going to be his life. He was not going to be primarily a superhero. But editorial mandated that they would bring back the original 5 X-Men, and this meant that they needed to bring Scott back into the fray. As well, the other 3 members that were currently alive, Beast, Iceman, and Angel, were not really working with the mutants so much. Beast would appear every once in a while, as would the others. But these were members of... Beast was an Avenger, and I think sometimes a Defender, but the other 2, Iceman and Angel, were Defenders at this point. And so editorial basically had these 3 characters leave the teams that they were on. They left... Beast left the Avengers, and Iceman and Angel left the Defenders. And they come back to team up with Scott again. And then in the meantime, they resurrected Jean. The resurrection of Jean Grey kind of happened in issues of Fantastic Four and the Avengers, if I recall correctly. And I actually didn't read those, but they happened right before X Factor issue number 1. And they are collected in a Premier Classic hardcover called Phoenix Rising. So you can read all that together. It has, a few issues leading up to issue 1 of X Factor, and it has issue 1 of X Factor, which has that team brought together. Anyway, so editorial mandated they bring those 5 together. They resurrected Jean Grey, and Scott all of a sudden up and just leaves his family. He sees that Jean's back, and it's like, oh, my original squeeze is back. My first girlfriend is back, from the dead, and I need to go be with her now, even though I have a wife and I have a newborn baby. I'm going to abandon them and go chase tail after, my first girlfriend. Which really took a lot away from his character, kind of defamed him a little bit. When I read that, this was something that's not... it's not a plotline that's really popularized a lot. It's not something that is spoken about a ton in the comics. As far as the ones that I've read, they haven't really referred back to this, so I didn't even know that this happened. I didn't even know that he did this, but when I read it for the first time, it was a big shock to me because I had no idea that Scott had done this, and this is completely against what Claremont himself would have done with the character had he been allowed to leave him as he wanted. But it's something that editorial decided would be a good idea, and then they threw Bob Layton was writing the earlier issues of X Factor, and he kind of creates this love triangle. But it's not really a love triangle. It's more of Scott abandons his family to chase after his old girlfriend, and he goes after her and refuses to even acknowledge the fact that he's married. He doesn't mention the fact that he's married and has a child to Jean. He just goes to her and he's like, oh, I missed you so much, and you've been dead and whatever. But he's hesitant to start back a romance with her. At least he's hesitant to do that. But he's attracted to her because one of the main reasons that he was with Madeline was because he was reminded of Jean Grey. And even though for the time that they've been married, he keeps trying to ensure her that she's more to him than just a Jean Grey copy. He comes out of that all of a sudden and he's like, oh, I still, I want to be with Jean. But he has this dilemma in his head where he's like, I want to be with Jean, but I have Madeline and I can't, I don't want to abandon Madeline because I married her because I love her and I have a baby with her. But the thing is that this, this shouldn't have even been an issue. Me being a family man, I have a wife, and to me, family is the most important thing in the world. My parents, my sister, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and my wife especially are all the most important thing to me in the world, and I never want to do bad by them, and I would never want to do anything bad to my wife. And so in my head, when I was reading this, I was like, this is so weird to have a superhero treating his wife like this, just abandoning his wife and kid. And I was literally reading these opening issues of X Factor, and I was like, Scott is a jerk. Cyclops is a jerk. He just abandoned his family because Jean Grey is all of a sudden back to life. I know that maybe there's a little bit of an issue. He has this internal feeling of, there wasn't really closure between his relationship with Jean. She just died, and he didn't get any closure for that. And I can understand where someone might have this feeling, but I feel like realistically, it might have been proper for him to actually explain to each of the, tell Madeline what's going on and tell Jean what's going on and deal with that, deal with those feelings. But the way that it was portrayed in the comics, he just abandons his wife, and that's why I think that Scott Summers was a huge jerk at this point in his, being. But the series, it's not all about the Scott Summers, Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor love triangle. It actually does have a lot more points to it. The whole idea of the series was that Angel quit the Defenders and he starts up this new team that they're calling X Factor, which is actually disguised as another team called the Exterminators. The Exterminators were designed as kind of a corporate government team that people can call on if they see something happening with mutants. Say, you're somewhere, you're out in public, or you're at work, or you're at the store, whatever you're doing, and all of a sudden there's a guy that's shooting fire, and maybe he doesn't know how to control his powers, but he possibly can hurt people. Then you call the Exterminators, and the Exterminators show up, and they will take that mutant away. And now the disguise is that they're imprisoning the mutants, and that they're, anti-mutant. They're hunters hunting down mutants, but they're just disguised this way because humanity still hasn't really grown accustomed to mutants. They don't exactly trust mutants. So the Exterminators pretend that they're taking these mutants away and locking them up, but they're actually taking them to the X Factor facility where the original 5 X-Men, now known as the X Factor, will train them and teach them how to correctly use their powers. So this is the whole idea of who X Factor are, and in these opening issues we see them interacting with a lot of different mutants, there's one that is a pyrokinetic. His name is Rusty, and they take him in and teach him how to use his fire-based powers because he actually hurt a woman really badly. Then we have the young Artie Maddox, who has the ability to basically form these images with his mind of what's happening. What he wants to. He can't speak. He speaks basically through these images that he shoots out of his mind. Essentially, is what he does. It's however you'd explain that. And Artie winds up actually being a member of the FF School, the Future Foundation, during Hickman and Fraction's runs on that series. So this is the whole idea behind X Factor. And it's actually a really nice, idea to bring in these mutants and stuff. But there is a little bit of a conflict because Warren Worthington, Angel, the person that he kind of starts the whole organization with, Cameron Hodge, he really is, he puts out these commercials that are demonizing mutants, and he's doing a really, bad job of making humanity maybe grow accustomed to him, to the mutants. So, Scott and other members are kind of upset because he's kind of giving them a bad name. Not trying to defend mutants in any way, not trying to go forward in making society used to mutants and accepting of mutants. So this series, in these early issues, it goes forth, and a few issues actually tie into the Mutant Massacre storyline. Mutant Massacre, basically the idea there is there's a group called the Marauders, the most famous member of which would definitely be Sabretooth, and they're hunting down mutants. So they start fighting against the X-Men themselves, and they wind up going into the sewers and hunting down the Morlocks. And one of the major points in this short little crossover was that the Marauders wind up slaughtering a lot of the Morlocks that were living in the sewers. And the remaining Morlocks wind up joining up. Some of them go off with the X-Men. A lot of them go off with X Factor and start training to utilize their powers and stuff, just like the other ones. But one major point that happens here is a lot of mutants are actually hurt and stuff of the X-Men and of X Factor. Several members of these teams are actually hurt, and you see, Nightcrawler and Colossus and Kitty Pryde all get damaged in ways that they cannot themselves recover from. And we see those the plot with how they recover and how the X-Men take care of them while they're in comas and they're not able to control their powers, often Uncanny X-Men. Meanwhile, in X Factor, we have Angel, who gets his wings literally harpooned, and he gets stuck into a wall by his wings. So X Factor rescues him, and they take the harpoons out of his wings, but his wings are irreparably damaged, and he's lying in the hospital, his wings all wrapped up, and the doctors are telling him, they're becoming infected, they're not healing properly. We're going to have to perform an operation. We're going to have to remove your wings. And Angel, he denies it. He doesn't want it at all. And he tells them, no, you're not going to remove my wings. They are what makes me who I am. I don't want to just be a regular human. I am a mutant. And unfortunately, the doctors are forced to sedate Angel, and they have to remove his gangrenous wings, or else he's going to, that infection is going to go to through his bloodstream to his heart, and he's going to die. So the doctors save his life by amputating his wings, making him basically into a normal human. So this is a major plot line that comes out of the whole mutant massacre storyline and goes forward into Fall of the Mutants. Meanwhile, one of the other things that's been happening throughout this series is that Louise Simonson came on about issue 5 or 6, and she introduces us to a new villain called Apocalypse. Originally, when Bob Layton was writing the series, he had all these villains that were part of this organization, and they were going to be working for, I've read, it's supposed to be the Owl, the villain from the Daredevil books. However, Louise Simonson, who was the editor on a lot of these books at the time, she wound up taking over the series and writing, and she decided that she wanted to have a new villain become the major antagonist for X Factor, just like X-Men has, the X-Men have their own villains, and she wanted X Factor to have theirs as well. So she introduced us to the mutant Apocalypse, and we don't really know that much about Apocalypse, except that he's extremely powerful and he has a lot of acolytes. So he goes out there, and we see through these issues, he kind of is existing in the background. He's recruiting more acolytes, and he goes out there and starts recruiting what we know as, and what he refers to as, his horsemen of the apocalypse. So, plague, pestilence, war, and death, he needs to recruit mutants who he believes can embody those ideas to be his horsemen. And throughout some of these issues, during the whole Mutant Massacre arc and going forward before Fall of the Mutants started, we see him recruiting several mutants, some of them from the Morlocks, some of them from elsewhere, to be members of his horsemen. And now the last remaining one is Death. And this is where it leads directly into Fall of the Mutants. And as we know, as is a very popular point of what happens with Apocalypse and with these characters, he winds up recruiting Angel to be his horseman of death. And he saves the wingless Angel, who had gone out and tried to fly a helicopter which resulted in this horrible crash in which the X-Men thought that, or X Factor actually thought that Angel had died. He rescues him from that flaming wreckage and tells him, "I'm going to give you new wings, and you're going to be my final horseman, my horseman of death." And this is where we lead directly into the issues that are collected in the Fall of the Mutants hardcover. And we see Angel actually become the Horseman of Death, and he becomes known as, for a long time forth, as Archangel. So that's a rundown of basically the first 18 issues of X Factor. I've really been enjoying reading this book. It's a very different series. While I do have qualms with the way that Cyclops was acting, I think that it was actually, the way that I'm reacting, that it did have such a visceral emotional reaction coming from me as a reader, I believe that it shows that it was actually well written. I think it's kind of a crappy, editorial plotline that was forced in there, but the X Factor series winds up evolving over time, and at this point, we're only a year and a half into the existence of the series, but already it's evolved into something that really stands apart from either of the other ongoing mutant books. And I think that Simonson herself, Louise Simonson, who is joined a lot of the time by her husband Walt as an artist on the book, has turned this book into something that's very notable, and I've really been enjoying it. Unfortunately, those issues are not entirely collected anywhere. Chunks of it are collected. We have the first issue is in that Phoenix Rising book, and then a couple issues are in the Mutant Massacre hardcover, but a lot of the other ones are only collected across those essential black and white paperback. So I'm hoping that at some point we see these other issues collected in either paperbacks or hopefully in oversized hardcovers to match the rest of the material that's on the shelves already. But until then, all we get are a couple issues collected here or there in those black and white essential editions. Otherwise, you have to read it through digital means like the Marvel Unlimited program, or if you want to just download the issues through torrent sites, whatever your poison is, that's how you would have to read those early X Factor issues. And I do recommend those issues. I do think that it was a really well written series. It's very, it's a good look at these characters, especially since the majority of these characters have been absent from the X-Men books for so long. It's really nice to see them back in the fray with all the mutants, to see them going forth and what they're doing. So anyway, thank you for watching this little rundown of the early, 18 issues of X-Factor and why I think that Scott was being a jerk and all that. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you're able to, I do recommend reading these issues. I hope you'll join me for further episodes of my X-Men Readathon, as I'm going to be talking about Fall of the Mutants and the events that preceded that and came after that. So if you haven't seen the other episodes of my X-Men Readathon, I hope you go back and watch some of those, where I talk about what I thought about those issues and what actually happens, the plot lines that are going on in here. Anyway, otherwise, please check out, my website and my Facebook group. The website is theomnibuscollector.com. I'll have links to all that stuff down below, links to where you can find me in social media and my contact and all that. I also will give a link to my previous episode of the X-Men Readathon. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you thought about the video. Share this video with your friends. If anyone would be interested, any X fans out there, please share this video anywhere you can. And spread the word about what I'm doing here, because I love doing these videos and I love it when you guys love watching me. So thank you so much for watching the video, and I really do hope that you enjoyed it. Anyway, you guys take it easy, be excellent unto each other as always, and I will see you guys next time.